and they secretly made plans to begin to try to control the Earth. The beginning of the secret government, going all the way back to Atlantis.
Wow.
And they immediately began to create the pyramids and the functional buildings that they had done on Sidonia, on Atlantis, to recreate the external Mer-Ka-Ba, to gain control of space and time, and thereby to be able to control the planet Earth. And this time they were very serious. They were not going to be swayed by someone telling them they should not do that. And they set up, the only thing is it had been a long time since they had done this. And so when they set up the whole experiment and did the whole thing, unlike the precision that they had done on Mars, they lost control. They lost control of this huge counter-rotating field of energy and was not able to, and I mean really lost control. And I'm sure it scared the pants off of even those guys. And it began to rip open the dimensional levels around Earth, primarily the lower dimensional levels. In fact, I think it was totally the lower dimensional levels. It could have equally been the higher dimensional levels, but that isn't what happened. And it would have been better if it had been. It would have been a much easier situation to heal. But that isn't what happened. And this was a situation kind of like, in terms of the human body, the dimensions are like different parts of the body. It's like you have organs, you got a heart doing one thing, a liver doing another thing, and you got a stomach doing another thing. And you don't want to break the membranes that go between all these things. And the membranes are like the dimensional thresholds that this Mer-Ka-Ba just ripped apart. And it was more like a tear, like a rip. And so it'd be just like taking your stomach lining and just ripping it open. And what happens is cells, or spirits, from other dimensional levels on the other side of the membrane, or like blood, came pouring into the stomach. You're not supposed to do that. That's against the law. And so you had billions of these, and maybe a lot more than just billions, of these lower dimensional, interdimensional spirits or beings coming in to this higher dimensional world for them, and they were scared to death. They were like little children, scared to death. This was outside of their experience, and they were flowed in here. It wasn't their fault, poured in here. And and it was a horrible situation. The ascended masters of the earth, with at that time there were only about 1,600 of them, did everything they could to heal the situation and act as rapidly as they could. And they did a very good job, and if it had not been for them, it would have been all over. We would have lost this place. It would have been gone. We would have lost it. But they managed to seal up the dimensional levels, and they managed to get most of these spirits back into the place where they're supposed to be. But not all of them. Many of them came into the people that existed in Atlantis at that time, and even into people all around the world, but mostly into the Atlanteans, into the area where this took place. And they just went into people, and so the people were no longer alone in their bodies, but they had anywhere from 1 to hundreds of other people in their bodies with them at the same time. And it was horrible. And there was like an internal war going on, and struggle. And everything began to degenerate horribly. All the systems broke down, all the emotional bodies, and that, you know, all your kinds of systems of all kinds of levels that we call culture, all broke down to nothing, and total chaos ensued. Disease became rampant, and in the last 48,000 years of Atlantis, it was a a living hell. It was the worst, much worse than anything you can conceive of on Earth. It was absolutely terrible everywhere. And it was looking like if it continued the way it was going, Earth would just die. And I mean a real permanent kind of death, where not this environmental stuff where the Earth could restore itself, but a real permanent death where it would just not be able to be used for its real purpose, which is a starseed, to seed cultures and races that go out. And so what did they do next? Getting a little tired of this one. This is hard to. It's not impossible for me, but it's a little hard. See, while I'm doing all this talking, I'm also working with you guys psychically to try to balance things and stuff. And there's a lot of people here. Well, right, okay. Boy, glad some of you guys have seen the videos here. They didn't know what to do, and so they called in many of the different consciousness levels from all over, from galactic levels to all kinds of places and things. I don't know if Galactic Command was called in on that kind of level, but there were a lot of levels of life that were asked for help. And nobody really knew exactly what to do. There had been kind of a plan that had been taking place before, and so that was looked at, and after a while it was finally decided that's what they ought to do. And again, what they were looking for was a situation where both sides would win. Both the Martians would come out of it, and the Mayans would come out of it in such a way that they could become friends again and keep going and keep growing through this whole situation. It's kind of like looking for a situation where the Israelis and the Arabs can both live together and be happy. Not easy, you know. I mean, when you got hate going back and forth and all kinds of weird stuff and everything's in chaos, it's really hard. On the other hand, you can't just go down there and just shoot all the Martians or shoot all the Lemurians or whatever, because the higher consciousness knows that there is no such thing as death. There's only transformation, and that they're tied to the evolutionary pattern, so it's just all going to recycle back again. The problem would just be delayed for a short time. It wouldn't solve anything, so they were looking for a real solution. Meanwhile, it's getting worse and worse and worse. They finally decided that they were going to wait till this particular moment over here, because that's the moment of transformation. They know that you can make certain kinds of consciousness changes and transformation at that time that would be easier then than at any other time. It's the proper moment for that kind of thing. So they had to wait for 4,000 years, or whatever that number difference is there, 3,500 years or so, until they got over there. And then when they came, about 200 years before this, is when it really began, right in this little, just a couple hundred years before that time, right in there. What it was decided is that they would synthetically put the planet. They knew that we'd already dropped down through the levels, down, 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 because of this experiment. The experiment was still going on and was still out of control, though they had managed to confine it to kind of an oscillating pattern, which we'll talk about a little while later, which what that pattern is what many people call the Bermuda Triangle. The star tetrahedral field that's still sitting down there on the ocean floor is primarily submerged, and it's a counter-rotating field. Part of it, when the mathematical differences between the one that's rotating counterclockwise and the one that's rotating clockwise, means that there is a greater differences going clockwise and the whole thing is moving this way, then everything is normal. But when it reaches its peak and the other side starts rotating back the other way, then it ends up being abnormal. And you have this triangular shape sticking out of the ocean, the apex of this thing, and which is the locked aspect of the field. And when anything that's inside of this sphere of energy, and especially the tetrahedral aspect of it, when that thing starts going clockwise, you have space-time distortion. And all you got to do is just look back through all of the various things, the airplane pilots and the boats and all the other stuff, and seeing all the crazy things that have gone on. And you can go right in here in 1 hour and have no problem, and because as long as it's going that way, there's no problem. As soon as it goes back the other way, bingo, you can have all this stuff going on that is weird because of the very nature of what a Mer-Ka-Ba is. So anyway, they decided to create, they knew that we were going to fall, and they knew we were going to fall heavy, and they were hoping we wouldn't fall any lower than where we are now. And they knew that once we got down here, if all things would go well, that they could get us back once we got over to this other point over here, which is where we are now, if it was carefully planned. And what they had to do then was to reconstruct, and which in effect would be to synthetically create a Christ consciousness grid that was destroyed when we fell. A new Christ consciousness grid for us, which is actually something that wouldn't normally happen. If we'd have fallen and they just didn't do anything, we would stay where we are for a long time before we would come around to the place where we'd ever make it back up to Christ consciousness again. So they decided that in order to save us, they would synthetically, or alchemically, however you want to look at it, step in and create the Christ consciousness grid around the earth long before it would normally take place. And they began 200 years before the fall actually took place. They did that by going out into the desert, which wasn't a desert then. It was a beautiful rainforest, actually, in an area that we now call Egypt, and Giza, which is now a desert. And they went out to a very specific spot there because in the halls of Amente, where the little flame of consciousness that the Anunnaki and the Assyrians created from us a long time ago, there are these poles that come out, these axis things of all the various levels of consciousness that we will someday arrive at. And one of those is the Christ consciousness one. And the pole actually comes right out of the earth at a very specific spot, and I mean really specific, like about the size of an atom, out in the middle of the desert there, which wasn't a desert then. And it's a vortex, it's a rotating field coming out, and there's one at the bottom, which is on a little island called Maria, out in the Pacific Ocean, and where the two poles emanate from each other. And one is female and one is male. And so they went to this spot, and it was Ra and Aragat and Thoth who went to this spot. These were three men that were from the Nakal Mystery School. And they went there, and they made a hole in the ground. Which was just sort of nothing there. They just made this little hole in the ground. Only the hole was about, well, I don't know, 6-8 feet around, and it was lined with bricks, and it went for 1 mile into the earth, approximately. A deep, absolute straight line. These were 6-dimensional beings. Whatever they thought happened. I mean, instantaneous. There was hardly any time in between it at all. These are very high-level people. and they didn't have to dig this hole. Just believe me, all they did is they just thawed it in place, and it was there, lined with the bricks and the whole thing. You'll understand here a little while why they did this out of stone. They didn't use sophisticated metals or things like this, which would be more high-tech looking and more sophisticated in some ways. There's a very definite reason why they chose to use natural materials. And coming out of there was this would be an aerial view from above. There was this vortex coming out like this into space. This would be like the shadow on the surface of the earth of that vortex from above. And there was really more than one of these coming out of there. I think there's 4. But they chose one. I don't know why they chose this particular one. They did. And then on a 4th dimensional level, they made three pyramids that were lined up, so the apexes were lined up precisely on the spiral. And then they created this one, which is now called the Great Pyramid. They created it from the top down with thought. And our science has verified that. And it doesn't know what to think about it, so it shoved it under the rug, along with everything else. When they carbon dated the stones, which is really the mortar and everything between there, they found that the oldest stones were on the top. And the youngest ones were on the bottom. And they don't know what to think about that. So they just stick it under the rug. It doesn't fit in our mind. These two were created much later, but they were 4th dimensionally created there in the first place. And then there's actually 6 more little pyramids that were made there. They were timing devices. And then over in this spot over here, they built a building which the Egyptians did not find until about 8 or 9 years ago, maybe. No, I was there in 85, so it's been, time goes by, doesn't it? It's been 85, 80, it's been over almost 15 years now, I guess, that when they first discovered that. There's a building there, and if you go there, you'll see that there's only about that much of the building left, the foundation. It's a golden mean rectangle building, and I think it looks like it. And they have taken aerial surveys of this and found that the center of the whole, the south face of the building, and the north face of the Great Pyramid, which I don't have this lined up right, it'll be over here. These things are all in a perfect, flawless line. They can't see it at all. And there's like about over a mile between these things. And it's so perfect that they just can't conceive of how the Egyptians could possibly have done that from so far away. But there it sits. And this line between this whole thing marks the center of this hole. So, and then later they have discovered that there is another one out there, about a block away, and another spiral coming around through this whole thing. This one, they have discovered, is a Fibonacci spiral, and this one is a golden mean spiral, which we'll get into this later, showing that they actually knew the difference between these whole things. They were perfectly lined up. And but a little later we'll talk about all this, because this is real important, because from an Egyptian point of view, you could not resurrect if you didn't know the difference between the Fibonacci spiral and the logarithmic spiral. It was essential for their particular resurrection philosophy. And they marked that, and from the aerial view of the Great Pyramids, it was really important to them. But I'll show you this clearer later on. But anyway, this hole and this marking here was the key to the beginning of a worldwide grid, what we call sacred spots or power places or whatever you want to call them. There are over or approximately 83,000 of these all over the world. And they are geomancy places in the ley lines and the grids of the earth that affect an electromagnetic field that shapes around the Earth by the very sticking of rods in the Earth and building of pyramids and putting crystals in certain places and these sort of elusive things. You can affect and shape a geometrical electromagnetic field that can be detected electromagnetically, though it's very weak, around the Earth, and shape it so that that shape is geometrically perfect from that. The entire 83,000 sacred sites were created through these three men on a fourth dimensional level first. Then, over 13,000 years, people all over the world were just drawn to these places like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman and Palenque and Uxmal and all these places all over the world, and built these structures on these very particular places. They had inner direction, and they built them according to their inner direction, which was following this higher will to create this pattern. And so it took 13,000 years to create the grid up there. It wasn't finished until 1989. It was just finished. And but this was the first place. And I'll say this, though, the proof has not come out, but eventually it will. Because Thoth said this one, not only is this laid out in a logarithmic spiral, and golden mean spiral, but all the sacred sites on the planet are laid out on either golden mean or logarithmic spirals, and they are all mathematically delineated back to this single point here, or actually it could be probably the one set is delineated here and the other set is delineated here. But that's the origin of all of them. All the temples that go down the Nile are all laid out on these logarithmic spirals or Fibonacci spirals. But everything over the whole planet is. And I don't think there's any exceptions to this. Though there might be. There's exceptions to just about everything, but there's not going to be much if there is. And what many people are discovering now is that the whole system is holographic. That once you know one building, you can determine what the next one's going to be, and you can keep doing this all the way through. That there's an interrelationship between all these various times and cultures that are all over the world, that there was a greater mind working through all of this, that the Peruvians were not working on their own, that the Mexicans were not working on their own, the Tibetans and the American Indians, all these various people, that there was a greater mind doing all of this. And the evidence keeps pouring in daily on that this is true. So anyway, they began the process there. They built this one pyramid right here. They then built a huge city, temples really, underneath the Great Pyramid, which they have located some of the rooms of this, though they do not understand it because they're in the Nile. They found them. They're inside the Nile with water flowing around them, but there's no water in the rooms. But they go way deep into the earth. The Great Pyramid sits on a huge mountain of solid rock. And underneath that, in the apex of that rock structure that's underneath there, is a complex designed to hold about 10,000 people. And it never quite needed that many, but they made it a little bit bigger than they needed. Eventually, it held about 8,000 people at its maximum point, because that was how many people reached immortality on the earth toward the very end of all of this. So they built all of this stuff, laid out the whole things, laid out the whole patterns, and then went back and sat on Olympus for 200 years and watched everything degenerate it even further. And then finally, no more than hours before Atlantis sank, they went back to this little place, which was called the land of Klim, which meant the hairy barbarians. They went to a place that we call, which is right near there, which is called the Sphinx. Now, in the Emerald Tablets, by the way, it says that Thoth created the Sphinx. But according to Thoth himself, he said that was a mistake by Durrell. And he also said, by the way, for some people here, that Durrell made many mistakes in the interpretation of the Emerald Tablets. That there were many, for example, in Durrell's interpretation, when he talks about this ship that I'm about to talk about, he says that it had atomic motors. This was interpreted in 1925, or 27, so 1925. And that was the most far out thing that Durrell could think about. But actually, there's no motors in there at all. You don't need anything because it's a Mer-Ka-Ba. It's a Mer-Ka-Ba resonance field. So it locks on with a living Mer-Ka-Ba field and is activated. It runs off thought and emotion. It doesn't require motors like we know. But anyway, so they waited for 200 years, and then they went back to the Sphinx, which is a marker. And that Sphinx is ancient. Even Thoth doesn't know who did it, because he says it was created before the 5.5 million year period. That puts it a little bit older than the 10,000 years that they're worried about in that whole thing. He says it's really old. You might wonder, well, how could that be? It could have been underground. Just even when Napoleon found the Sphinx, all that was sitting out of the earth was the head. He didn't even know there was a body attached to it. And so it's hard to say how old that thing is. All you can do is judge it, age the rock. That's about it. And say how old that stuff is. He says it's really, really old and doesn't know how old it is. And he doesn't even know who did it. But he says that underneath there is the oldest, what he says is the oldest synthetic object in the world, which is a vehicle. It sits approximately a mile down underneath there, also, in a round circular room, and it's from the top, it's a ship that looks like that, just a round circle, and from the side, it looks like that. It's like a disc. It's just like a big, flat disc with approximately about 22 foot ceiling space between the top and the bottom, something roughly about that big, and about 2 city blocks across. Something around about that area. I'm not sure. It's based on the proportions of the Great Pyramid, or the other way around. The pyramid was based on these proportions. When the pyramid was created, it looked like this. This is the wrong angle here, but it's all right. The Great Pyramid has a missing capstone. It has a big piece off the top. There's all kinds of ideas about where that missing capstone is and everything. According to Thoth, it's in the halls of records. It's 5.5 inches high, it's solid gold, and it's a holographic image of the whole thing with all the little rooms in it and everything. And it's a miniature of the Great Pyramid. And that's it was not really a capstone. That's a big piece that's missing up there. I think it's 24 feet square. It's not just a few blocks that are missing. I mean, you get up there, it's like a room. It's a big, flat, huge place. And what it is a landing platform. This is according to Thoth's teaching. And the ship was flown back to. They got into it. Thoth was one that flew it the last time. Ron also got into it. It used Thoth's spine, though, to activate it. And then they raised it to one overtone higher than the Earth sits on, allowing it to pass right through the Earth, up into the atmosphere. And they flew it to Atlantis. They picked up the rest of the immortal beings that were there. By this time, there were about 1,600 of them. And, is that right? Yeah, about 1,600. And then he said that they got no more than about a quarter mile up away from the surface when all of it, the last bit of Atlantis went into the water. They all sat there and watched this thing go in the water. And then they flew from there to Egypt and landed on top of this thing. So that must have been quite a sight, considering that this was perfectly smooth, with stones that are fitted so close together that you couldn't even hardly see the seams. A piece of paper in the middle, and perfectly smooth, gleaming white, and this transparent flat disc sitting on top. If you'd have brought the pyramid up to its apex, the top would have exactly hit where the top surface of this was. And if you were to look at this from above, this is what you would see. Let's do it in the proper colors, I guess. You would see, I'm going to make this smaller. You would see the pyramid like this. And you would see this thing sitting on top of it, approximately like that. The perimeter of or the circumference of this ship was equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid. For those of you who know sacred geometry, that's the dimensions of life itself, which we'll talk about when we get into the sacred geometry and all this other stuff. And he said they no sooner landed on there, locked in their fields and everything. Now remember, this is an entire group of 1,600 people creating a group Mer-Ka-Ba that is a rotating field where there's a star tetrahedral pattern moving in here and a bunch of other ones, which I'm not going to get into. And there's a spherical pattern in that. And then a huge Mer-Ka-Ba field around that. And they lock that in, creating their own electromagnetic and magnetic fields. Very, very important in a pole shift, because when the pole shifts, what happens is, for hundreds of years prior to the pole shifting, the magnetic field begins to decrease, going down and down and down and down, which our science will tell you has been going on for 500 years on Earth. It's been getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker for 500 years. And now beginning to migrate and move. This is the reason the whales come in and land into the beaches and things, because they're following these ancient magnetic lines, which have been a certain way for a long time, which are now distorting and moving into land masses, and they're just following these things right into there, which are not supposed to be there. It's all getting distorted and changed and getting weaker. We will come up to a place right prior to the poles shifting when the magnetic field of the Earth will just collapse in. It'll go away. There won't be any. A little later, I'll show you an article here that they have just discovered something brand new in the human brain. They haven't discovered anything new in the human body in 300 years. They just discovered something, and that is that the cells of the human brain have magnets in them. And there's a magnetic sheet that moves around the entire brain, which they never knew was there. And what they will eventually discover is that memory is a function of a magnetic field, which has a very specific geometrical pattern, which I'll show you a little later, and that it requires a low-level external magnetic field to keep it intact. And not just any kind of field. It needs the Earth, or it needs a pattern that can be regenerated, very much like the Earth. And when that pattern totally goes away, something else also goes away. It's called memory. It's like pulling the plug on the computer. We know nothing. Everything we've stored is gone. And this is what happened in Atlantis. Here's all these people, very, very sophisticated. You would really be amazed at how sophisticated they were and where they were at and what the levels of awareness they were at. And all of a sudden, in a 20-hour period, gone. No awareness, nothing. Didn't even know how to, I mean, just imagine what happened right now. If you suddenly had your mind erased, you wouldn't even know how to get out of this building. You wouldn't know what anything was for. It would just be like, it would just be pure survival. You would still be alive, you'd be conscious, you'd be aware, but you wouldn't know what anything was. You wouldn't know how to open a door, you wouldn't know anything. And these people were right back to figuring out how to make fires and keep alive and stay warm. And right back down to the basics again. But not these guys. Because they had created their own Mer-Ka-Ba field, which keeps their memory intact. And again, the definition that I'm defining immortality is the memory that stays intact. And so once you get your Mer-Ka-Ba, the living field Mer-Ka-Ba in place, you can keep your memory intact under any conditions whatsoever. Even under conditions that you would not imagine that this kind of field could possibly protect you under, like an atomic bomb blowing up or something like this. Wouldn't affect it. You could be right in the midst of it and it wouldn't even affect it. You could walk away from it. Would not affect it. Nothing can affect it. Not even the middle of the sun can affect it. And because it's the basic creation pattern, what created all this stuff. It's what we created the whole thing with. It's what we stepped in with it, and it's the doorway out. No one's going to create an experiment and get into it if there isn't some way out. And that's the way out. And so this magnetic field kept their memories intact while everybody else's was erased, except for one group of people, which I still do not understand how they did it. They had to have some of the ancient memory of the Mer-Ka-Ba, and that's the Mayans. The Mayans came from Atlantis. They say so. There's a document called the Troano document. Let me see if I've still got that. No, I didn't bring it with me this time. There's the Troano document, which was translated by Pelagion, which is sitting in the British Museum right now. It's Troano, T-R-O-A-N-O. And it is a series of stones on this wall describing the sinking of Atlantis. And it describes how Atlantis upheaval went up and down, and all these things took place, and how there were 10 countries in Atlantis corresponding to the 10 points, and that 64 million people were killed in one night. And it shows on there the Mayans escaping in these boats while there's these modern-looking cities with pyramids and volcanoes going off everywhere. And then there was 3.5 stones that were painted black, which are the 3.5 days that happens when the field collapses, and the pole shift is 20 hours, okay, but the field is gone for about anywhere from 2.5 to about 4.25, and it usually is 3 to 3.5 days long. Those are the minimum and maximum amounts that anybody's ever seen it. But it's usually about 3 or 3.5 days long, and the last time was probably 3.5 days long, because each one of these was a day, and they just painted them black, and then the third one they painted half black. They came back again. And so this description was pretty good. Somehow, and they did that 3,500 years ago, they wrote that. So somehow, they were able to keep their memory of all of this, and I don't know how they did it unless there was somebody there that had this awareness. Anyway, so what happened was a lot of these people went all over what's now Europe, the survivors of this, everywhere else, and basically started over. There was very little left from that. Now, this was the time that the Bible refers to as Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Whether or not it's true that there was only Noah and no one else that survived out of this, I don't know how that's really possible, because there's over 118 stories around the world of the deluge from around the entire globe. Who were there writing these 118 stories? I don't know if it's really true. I can't say that for sure or not. Somebody had to write those stories. And if it was somebody afterwards, they couldn't be talking about what happened, because they wouldn't have been there. And if it all started out with just 6 people or whatever it was, it would have taken a long time to repopulate the earth. You know, this is true. Also, well, that's another story, though, how he handed that to. That's the Peruvian story of after the deluge, where Thoth, according to the Peruvian story, Thoth came down and gave the golden rod to Mancos, who became the first king of the Inca Empire. He was to find the lost city of Cusco and begin the empire. And that happened right after the first stone emerged out of the Great Flood. And I don't know, but according to Thoth, that's not exactly accurate, but there were survivors around the world, and quite a few of them. And but they had not much going on up there. So they had a real high-tech body. They had all the equipment. They just didn't have the software. They had a good computer, though. And so, let's see, where were we on this? I'm going to have to end this. We are really behind. You guys haven't asked any questions at all, and we're still behind. I don't understand how this works. So anyway, after this, after the deluge came back, I mean, after this all happened, the deluge, by the way, was the poles that were where Hawaii, etc., where they melted completely. That was part of what was going on. But evidently there was another thing going on also, which science is now coming up with. In the Bible it talks about the springs that began to come forth and all of this. Now, has anybody seen the evidence now that they're bringing forth? What science is pretty, they think that there was a huge amount of water in the earth, like a ring around there, and that it began to come forth in just like huge amounts. And there's a lot of physical evidence of this, that the earth was literally just deluged on top of this. Not only did the poles melt, which would have risen them 200 or 300 feet, but there was much more water coming out of the center of the earth in all of this. Anyway, the Great Pyramids, by the way, were covered with water for a long period of time to about the 2/3 level. This is one of the proofs that the Great Pyramid was not created in the fourth dynasty, as they say. And they don't want to hear this, though, but the evidence is there. Because even though the stones were removed by the Muslims a few hundred years ago, the impact of this thing sitting in water so long merged all the way through, and the watermark is still there at the 2/3 level. And when they entered into the Great Pyramid, this was what's his name, He was Muslim, I can't remember. When they broke into it, they basically broke in. There was a door there. They could have just pushed a button and it would have opened up, but they dug their way in and came back out and then found the door. And you don't push a button, you just touch it just right, and the whole door would swivel back. And when they entered into the Great Pyramid, the entire pyramid, all the King's Chamber, the Great Hallway, all the rooms all the way down, everything was covered with about a ½ inch of sea salt. And with that and the watermarks meant that this was built before the Great Deluge, because there's never been any time that we know of in the last 4,000 years, when the Earth has been covered with water, especially that area, which is the center of the planet, center of all landmass, right in there, where that sits. And that's the exact center, by the way. I don't know if you know that. It's the precise center of all the land masses of the Earth. It's where the Great Pyramid sits. And so it's just another proof that this was much, much older than what they thought. The ship was then flown to the island of the Sun, where, well, first of all, Ra got out here by an opening through the top into a room that sat at that exact level where the water level was, at the 2/3 level, which that room has not been found yet, but Thoth says it will be. And when they do, they will find that it's made out of red, black, and white stones. And that it was where the ceremony, that Ra came out of there with about 1/3 of the people, held a ceremony, and left from there to the underground city, and that and it was Ra and approximately 1/3 of the ascended masters of the Nakal Mystery School that began Egypt. The ship was then flown to Peru, specifically to the island of the Sun on Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, and Thoth got out there, and that's where he handed the rod to Marcos, and who became the first king of the Inca Empire. And Thoth stayed there in Peru. It became the love. He loved it there. When I went to Peru, I mean, you could tell by the way and over here he was telling me all these places. In Egypt, he wouldn't talk much at all. He doesn't like Egypt, I don't think. But he liked Peru a lot. He had a baby in Peru. I think that's what did it. Softened chap. And anyway, and then the ship was flown to the Himalaya Mountains, where Ara got off, along with about another 1/3 of the people. And 7 of them flew the ship back to the Sphinx, lowered it down in that room, where it remained there until just a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, where it was brought back up into the air by a 23-year-old Peruvian woman who is now controlling the airways. Right now, it's really up to her what happens on a lot of levels of life. And I'm going to leave all of this, concepts of things, and we're going to head into Egypt, though. However, before we do, I'm going to allow questions to be asked here, because we've gone a long time without any. And we've only got about 20 more minutes, and it's 9 o'clock already. We're going to have to work real hard tomorrow. Egypt is the area that we're going to focus on. Those 3 areas, Egypt and Peru, which includes the Yucatan all the way down to Peru, and Tibet, in that area up in there, those were chosen because of the nature of the Earth's geometrical and geomancy fields. Egypt became the male aspect of the Christ consciousness grid. The Yucatan Peru became the female aspect of the grid, and the Tibet became the child or the neutral energy of the grid. And there are pyramids in all 3 of those areas. Huh? Tibet became the neutral or child energy of there's the mommy, daddy, and baby energy of the field. Everything is mommy, daddy, and baby in one way or another. And that female is the Mayan, Peruvian. I'm not going to talk about those other 2 places very much, though my experiences there and everything were really powerful for me, and I learned a lot being in some of those places. But I'm going to focus mostly on Egypt, mostly because the vast majority of people that come to this workshop have Egyptian-based backgrounds. though not always. And it depends. Sometimes I don't, but I think this one is for sure. And we're going to go to Egypt also because that happened to be the only place or area where survivors from Atlantis and the Nokal Mystery School were located at the same place, because in the other ones they were not Atlantean people who survived that, but different races. It was Incans and other races besides the Atlanteans. And we're going to look at the Sumerian and Egyptian cultures as they unfolded and what happened in all of that. That's what we're going to start in when we start in tomorrow. And we don't have too much more of that to go into, and we'll eventually focus in on one very specific area of Egypt. If you talk to most Christians or a Catholic right now, they will tend to look at Egypt as being a cult and not a very healthy place to get information from, and I agree with them. There's only one tiny little speck of light that came out of Egypt, and that was for 17 and a half years. That came out of one little dynasty. But it was a real blast of light. And we need to look at what happened there. That's when they said that there was only one God. And what happened in that school was real important. In fact, what happened in that school, according to Thoth and his information, created the Christian religion. It was that one particular school that was the founder behind all of that. And the Coptics that came out of that, and the Essenes that also were affected and came out of that, all of that was all planned from a long time ago. But again, if you are a Christian, you can just listen to this, and you don't have to accept it if you don't want to. But this is what Thoth has told me. And so this is the area we're going to head into tomorrow. We're going to get into what is called the Egyptian Mystery School of Akhenaten. We will start in that pretty early tomorrow, and that will lead into the sacred geometry. And we'll begin to get out of this kind of talking about history and going into very, very specific aspects of human nature and the mind. Okay, now, where's that talking machine?
Okay, I have a hard time understanding how these ascended master beings like Thoth and Ra and Akhenaten can create miraculous events on the earth, like creating the pyramids and knowing all about how to put thought in one area and create these deep holes in the ground, and yet they have to create these vehicles to travel in. I'm confused as to what there's sort of two parts to it. One is why would they need the vehicle is one part, and the second part of it, my question is, it seems as if this is in a certain way interfering with the normal process of human evolution, and I'm not quite sure where this non-interference and help comes in.
Okay, the interference, first of all, was there from the beginning. It was there from the moment that the Martians stepped in. It was there from the moment that the Lucifer Rebellion started on. And there's been so much interference in this place, it's ridiculous what's gone on. And the only reason this interference here was ordained from higher levels. Permission was granted to do what was done here. They did not do this without just on their own. They asked permission and said, what do we do? And they said, here's what you do. So all of this was totally ordained from the highest levels of consciousness in this galaxy. And in terms of using the vehicle that was chosen, this particular one, they did not need vehicles to personally travel from one place to another. That you can read about in the Emerald Tablets, where he would go into deep space purely on his own without any kind of vehicles or anything. But this was a traditional, you might say, vehicle. It was considered a worship, written as a worship in the Emerald Tablets. And I remember when I read that as a warship, it repelled me because I was thinking, in terms of light and stuff, and I go, what's this warship stuff, And that was before I found out about the Greys or any of that stuff. But in conjunction of the Greys and the various races that are associated with it are here, and all the kinds of stuff that they're doing, which happens to be timed with this very event that's going on right now, I can understand why they would need a warship to... It says right in there that every single time that we come to these two apexes on the precession, that the dark side of our nature, if you want to see it as unity, always tries to take over the earth. It has for hundreds of millions of years, and it has always failed. But it always tries. That's part of its job. And this ship is tuned to the earth. It's a ship that it takes an absolutely pure person that has reached a particular level, at least, of Christ consciousness to operate it, because it's run on not just understanding, but it's run on universal unconditional love. It's love that operates that ship. And so when a person can operate it and move it into the air, sure, you could sit there and do that, but to get to the ship out, it's like... it's been going on for so long, and I don't know why they have to do that, for sure. I mean, I can conceive of what you're seeing of why they don't have to do that, but they do. And even in 1992, we're still using the thing. It's still out there. This is what forced all the Greys to leave from here. And it's an amplifier. I mean, it only requires one person. Now, one person can turn water into wine real easy. One person can even move a mountain. It might be a little harder for one person to completely change the entire nature of a planet. But with that ship, one person can do that. One little female, little frail 23-year-old woman was able to do that. And so maybe at some point, or maybe at certain points in our evolution, we don't need to use that thing. And I do understand what you're saying, because I went through the same stuff. I said, what is this all about? I mean, it's so weird. And but I kind of get it now. It took me a long time, and I kind of see why it's used. And Thoth and the Ascended Masters do not use spaceships. This is the only vehicle that is in their use, and it is not a normal vehicle. It has no motors of any sort whatsoever. It's simply a shape that is only 3 to 5 atoms thick. The sides are 3 atoms thick, and the top and bottom are 5 atoms thick in places. Some places only 3 atoms thick. And it's translucent and transparent, and it is designed to amplify and connect in with your own Mer-Ka-Ba. So you have to create a living Mer-Ka-Ba field even to get into it and make it work. A person connected directly with the Lucifer Rebellion could not run that, no matter what they did, no matter how much they knew. They couldn't make it move or function. It requires someone, at least in the level of Christ consciousness, to ever even begin to get this up. But I still don't, even I'm with you at a lot of levels, I still don't really understand. From what I now know, it would only require 2 people to come together to create a living Mer-Ka-Ba field much stronger than this. But one person, I don't know if that's possible without that. Okay, next one.
If I could back up just a little bit. I'm not real clear about, you were talking about how the Christ consciousness was artificially started on the planet, or seeded into the planet, and is that...
How they did that?
Yeah, how did they do that?
They did it by making that hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And that hole was tuned right over the axis of what would be the Christ consciousness someday. And then they connected energetically to the spiral by putting the Great Pyramid right on it. And then they started doing geomancy all over the Earth with these pyramids and structures all over the entire planet, which shapes space-time around the Earth and forms, they're aiming for a stellated dodecahedron around the planet. And we know this is there now. Our governments know this is there. Our governments knew, there's 3 of these up there that are human. Our governments became aware even in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, of the first grid that was up there, which is our level of consciousness. And then recently it become aware of the dodecahedral field. And that shaping is something you can sense. It's a real thing. But without the creation of that grid, without the building of all these pyramids and all this stuff that's been going on all over the Earth, the grid wouldn't happen. It would only happen naturally over, if you just let nature take its course, over a long, long time. But if they did that, we would never make it because of the distortion that this field had done within us and all that happened. We would have probably never made it. So they were trying to look for a way to heal us and to put us back to where we were and get everybody to be friends again and to take off again on the evolutionary pattern. And it was their belief that maybe, they didn't know if it would work or not, maybe it would work if they could create the grid and they can create a scenario where we all came back into this grid again, then we could get back into this place where we were before all of this took place. I don't know what the percentages is. There are times when it doesn't work. It doesn't always work. And when that happens, generally, that planet just dies. In our case, when it got right up to the very end, it looked like it was not going to work. And I'll have to tell you what they then further did something further on top of all of that, which is what's caused this incredible piece of paper in the middle. And perfectly smooth, gleaming white, and this transparent flat disc sitting on top. If you'd have brought the pyramid up to its apex, the top would have exactly hit where the top surface of this was. And if you were to look at this from above, this is what you would see. Let's do it in the proper colors, I guess. You would see, I'm going to make this smaller. You would see the pyramid like this. And you would see this thing sitting on top of it, approximately like that. The perimeter of or the circumference of this ship was equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid. For those of you who know sacred geometry, that's the dimensions of life itself, which we'll talk about when we get into the sacred geometry and all this other stuff. And he said on Earth, which is causing the entire universe to begin to focus on Earth, that's also something that's never happened before. All life has never focused on a single point. But this, we're creating something here right now that is attracting attention from every level of existence there is. I don't know, did I help at all on that?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, you got to have a little magic stick to talk from.
I got it.
Okay.
I've heard channeled by the Ascended Masters a number of times.
You got to have that little stick. You got to.
Couple-part question here. When Atlantis...
She's got the next one after.
She does.
Okay.
When Atlantis sank, did the Hebrews migrate? This is one part of it. Were the Martians gone in Atlantis? Were they humanoid?
The Martians were extremely humanoid, only they had a slightly bigger skull, and but very, very humanoid. The humanoid form is used a lot. throughout time and space.
Were they wiped out in Atlantis when it's...
Who?
The Martians.
No
So
way. They're running the world right now.
That's what I'm wondering.
The secret government is almost totally run by Martians.
I was wondering if they're connected with the Greys from that time also.
Well, see, the Martians are really very ancient race, older than the Greys, really. And in fact, this is the reason a lot of people wondered. The Greys who have been here, for those of you the Greys, for some of you who don't know who the Greys are, they're a race of beings that are really all over the place. They've got worlds all over the place. One of their primary places where most of the Greys that come here is from are centered around the middle star of the belt of Orion, which is the Crab Nebula, which is an exploding nebula, and that shock waves from that, as they expand out, are wiping out their worlds, one right after another. And so they're looking for new places to be. However, that's not their real problem. They're concerned with problems much deeper than just some of their planets being wiped out. Much deeper. And the Greys are a race who are little tiny people with these big heads and these huge eyes, little tiny mouth, and they have kind of gray skin. That's why they're called gray. And they believed in what Lucifer said a long time ago, and they followed the Lucifer rebellion. And basically, they severed their connections from God, the love connection, which was necessary, and to create the external Mer-Ka-Ba, which is the UFO. And they got in these ships and began to live separately from the rest of the universe, along with lots of other races that did this. And they, because their emotional bond and love was gone, they slowly quit being involved with sexual energy and began to use test tube, you might say test tube babies, so it's got very sophisticated. And they quit eating, drinking mostly liquids and blood was their primary thing. And they changed, they ended up with no emotional body, no feelings, no compassion, no nothing, just pure logic, and none of that kind of stuff. The Martians were really kind of like their great-grandfathers. And this is the reason why when the Greys came here and immediately started doing all the experiments and all the interfering that they did, the direct manipulation, the reason, there are a lot of life around this planet. You wouldn't believe, if you don't know, you wouldn't believe how much life is centered around this planet right now. When life forms come in, they come in on one overtone higher. And so because that way we can't see them, and yet they can monitor us, and then they're just one breath away from being here whenever they want to be here. And it's very convenient. There's so many people here right now, the overtone around the Earth is filled. It's like a Rams parking lot. It's just like solid. There's no more space left. And they've gone to the second overtone. And the second overtone is just about filled up. There's so much life here wanting to witness this unique situation that's developed. And so there's so much life here, focused on here. I mean, you got the whole universe focused on this place, that they can stop the Greys like that. Why not? Why don't they? Why can the Greys just go in here and take hundreds of thousands of people and manipulate them and do all these things like this? Because we have gray blood in us through the Martians. The Martians and the Greys are brother and sister, interlinked, and we have that blood in us, and so they have a lineage link to us, and because of that, they have this law, they have the right to be able to do this. No one else can get away with it. If anyone else tried to do it, they would just stop them flat out. But the Greys do this, and they knew they could get away with it. And they chose us because we still have an emotional body. And they have now learned that the only way that they can get through the Great Wall is they can't take their spaceships through the Great Wall. They have to learn how to create a living Mer-Ka-Ba, which requires understanding of the laws and your connection to God, the emotional body, specifically unconditional love for all life. These things must be whirling around you in counter-rotating motions, which creates the living Mer-Ka-Ba field. which is the only vehicle that's ever been able to get through the Great Wall. And they don't know how to create one of these because they got a missing component, no emotional body. And so they have this is what I mean, they've got a real problem, because this dimensional level appears to be about ready to be non-functional for a while. And so their great problem is they got to get out of here, and they can't. They're trapped in something that is going to recycle them, you might say. Their form is going to be destroyed, and their spirit is going to be forced to... I don't know exactly what happens in those circumstances. I don't know how. Spirit cannot be killed. Can't be destroyed. So I don't know how, if it starts over, I don't know what the procedure is. I'm not sure. But they've got a real problem. They chose us because we have our emotional body. They got this connection with us, allowing them to do these kind of things. And so what their decision was, from purely logical mind, was, well, we can't make it through, so we will make a sub-race with our genes in it that maybe can make it through. So they took human beings, and lots of them, and experimented with them. They first started experimenting with cows and horses and a few other animals, very specific animals. Animals, you see, when we started breathing in this way, taking the air in and out through our mouth and our nose and not through the top channels up through like this here, that was the direct result of that was good and evil consciousness. And when we started bringing animals into us closely, those animals, by resonance, began to breathe the way we did. And so the cows and the horses and the dogs and the cats and all these things are doing exactly the kind of breathing patterns that we have. And so the initial steps were to do experimentation with the animals that were associated with us, and primarily cows. And so there was cattle mutilation. If you look at Linda Howe's work that she did through ABC, and called The Strange Harvest, that was set up around there, and you look at that carefully, and if you talk to her now, and the evidence she has out now, she can prove to you that nobody on Earth could possibly do the cattle mutilation. There is no technology known on Earth that can even come close to do this. They found cows, for example. Not only is all the surgery, high-tech laser surgery, that only a few people in the world can even do, and there's hundreds of thousands of cows out there, somebody would be real busy doing all this stuff. But on top of that, they're finding these cows without one single red blood cell in them. Not even one. We have no technology that can do this, that we know of. You talk to any doctor, there's no technology that can remove every single red blood cell out of every single tissue in the entire body. We don't know how they did it. And yet there they are. They're doing it. And so they're primarily taking out the breathing apparatus and the sexual organs, because that's the areas that they wanted to study, was the sexual energy and the breathing patterns of these animals. And then they started doing it with people. They look at us like bugs. They see us on such a low level that we don't even count from their point of view. It would be like us taking a little, like when we're working with rats. We don't think, well, who cares? They don't matter. It doesn't matter if they hurt or anything like that. They don't see us as being much more than just a very, very low level of life. And so from a logical point of view, that may be true. From a compassionate, loving point of view, that's not really true at all. But they don't have that aspect of themselves in them. And so they wanted to create another race of beings that would be primarily their genes, but connecting in our sexual energy and our emotional body. That's what they really wanted to do, and blend that in with them and create this race between the two of us, hoping that race would be able to create the living Mer-Ka-Ba and would be able to go into over the Great Wall, which evidently it did. It was able to do it, though this is not going to happen until 2012, from where we sit here now. That race does make it through. And an example of that is Bashar. Who's familiar with Bashar here? Bashar is the end result of that race, coming from 300 years in the future back to here. But their ultimate plan what the Greys have in mind for us is not very nice. They do not really care what happens to us. Their plan, and they had underground bases all over the whole world. Their primary base was in Dulce, which was around Dulce, between the New Mexico and Colorado border, which was more cattle mutilation there than anywhere else in the world. However, cows were found everywhere, even on isolated islands out in the middle of the Pacific. And so they've I don't know how far I want to get into all of this stuff with these guys, but what they planned to do originally was to get this other race going, create it primarily on the fourth dimensional level, so it was real used to functioning from those levels of existence, and then open up very rapidly the fourth dimensional level on the Earth, which would kill everybody on the planet. We would all go into total separation and chaos and wipe us all out, exterminate all life on the planet, and replace us with this super race, which was more them than us. And that was their plan. And I don't really think that that plan has totally been stopped, though a great deal of pressure has been applied for them to not do this. And the person who raised the ship up, the very first thing that she did after she got the crystal that controlled the programming and changed the geomancy of the whole planet and put it into down her spine, the very first thing she did after she did that was she thought, the Greys are all now, as long as the Greys are here, they are going to find themselves getting sick from an incurable disease that's associated only with Earth. If they leave here, there'll be no problem. Immediately, Greys all over the world started dying. Within 30 to 60 days, there were people, the UFO people were all going, what's going on? What's going on? All the Greys are dying. The secret governments, which originally made pacts with them and contracts with them and thought that they were the good guys, eventually got down the line and realized they weren't really the good guys, and actually went to war with them and were winning. They went into certain bases and, I mean, just like mowed them down. The guys couldn't even resist them. And they finally, by the end of 1992, almost all, and that's what she said, that they had to leave by the end of 1992. There were hardly any Greys here left at all. And at this point, they're probably existing, if there are any at all, outside the fields and coming in very quickly and getting back out because they can't stay here for very long. But where'd they go? They just shifted it back to another planet called Mars and set up all their bases all over there, and now they've got all their operations still going there, just as strong as ever, but they can't come near the Earth. And she didn't try to totally stop them, she just said, you can't be here anymore. That's all she said. And so it's not over. There's still a lot going on those levels. But it's okay. We've already won this game. And though there are a lot of real interesting things coming up in the next few years, maybe this year, maybe real soon, maybe tonight, I don't know.